Welcome to the Tricord Advisors podcast, where we answer life's hard questions to help you make smart decisions with your money. I'm Jeremiah Lee, and this is Randy Barkley. We're both certified financial planners. I'm also a California licensed attorney.
Okay, Jeremiah, we are going to be talking about trends. And I always tell clients, if you knew who the winners were back in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and even the 90s, how much more money you could make. But of course, the selection process is really hard. So therefore, I'm going to throw the offer to you. What is your crystal ball telling you right now? What's going to happen over the next 10 years, right?
Yeah, 10 years. That's, I think, a good thing. Where are we going to be 10 years from now? Every year, there's people from Barron's or other publications that say, where will we be next year?
Right.
They put references on the S&P or the NASDAQ or the Dow. They're always wrong, of course. It's hard to predict. So, doing that 10 times in a row to jump out 10 years is even further. And a good comment is we always work hard not to predict. We just want to react to what's there.
Again, I think everybody wants to be able to predict. Everybody wants to have that winner in their portfolio, but 99.9% of the time, you're not going to pick the winner. You're just not going to do that. But there are trends, right? There's some things happening.
And what we try and look at in this type of a thing to say 10 years from now is not, okay, this company is going to win. Apple's going to do great or something, because they may or may not. But to say, what are the larger trends that our world, our economy, our country are going through that may take a while to play out, but may put us in an entirely different world 10 years from now. So some of the things, we have a number of lists of these that we've talked about and kind of thought about, but just to jump into some of them, I think the first one that I see that we've talked about is medical.
Right.
Where we're at now compared to where we were 10 years ago, I think kind of pales in comparison is where we're going to be 10 years from now.
Yeah, I think the themes are clear. Gene sequencing is almost a brand new frontier, but it's having some remarkable results, but it's not without its dangers. And I think that's going to be a trend that is going to be more and more prevalent as we go down in the next 10 years or so.
And I think for any of these that we see, any of these future items, there's people who can say this is so exciting. Mm-hmm. There's others that see the doom of how we're on the cusp of destruction. Right. And there's an element of having to hold both of those at the same time. Each one of these categories we go through has some scary aspects. Gene therapy has some scary attributes to it. I think I saw that movie, right? Where people got mutated and whatnot. But there's also some really exciting stuff. And what I think is great is the therapies they're coming out with, the gene therapies they're coming out with to treat and deal with things. We're not talking about the scientific in the womb issues, but rather to say we can treat folks for certain things by having their genes fill these gaps, which are phenomenal. That we can even do that.
And there's I get a publication from City of Hope, and the amount of genetic testing and research and development they're working on in genetics, and I think what the positive impact is going to be in the hands of people that are healers that are really trying to do a positive outcome. Not only in cancer, but also in some really dreaded diseases where they can do some, like sickle cell anemia is one area for the Black community that they're doing a lot of research. Diabetes, they're doing a lot of research, and they're getting into the actual chromosomes. I mean, they're getting in, this CRISPR, and they're cutting and splicing and such. And there's a lot of people think, morally, is that correct or not? I mean, they're almost like there is God. You're almost doing a godlike, interpretation of what's going on. And I have a tendency to not be that extreme, but I do look at it could go awry, right?
Yeah, right. Where is this heading? The other aspect that's similar in medical, and a little away from the gene therapy, but there's also a number of weight loss drugs that are coming out.
Yeah,
and some of them aren't just the snake oil, take a pill, but some of them are actually some really great developments. And one of them you mentioned, to treat diabetes, but it actually has a secondary aspect that it's great for weight loss. There's a comment in one of the articles read that saying 40% of Americans are currently considered obese, and what that does to our health and medical system. And as we move forward, how do we? There's the what Kaiser Permanente has the preventative care model.
Right.
How do we move into that? And then there's also the responsive care model. If something's wrong. But I think 10 years from now, medically, we're going to be in a brave new world of things that we can do. And there'll be, some risks, there'll be legislation, I'm sure, but there'll be some really wonderful developments. And so when you think of investing, there's a lot of those companies that are going to do great. And What we are not looking to do here today is to pick, 3 or 4 or 5. When you get up to biotech and some of these companies, it's really, really hard to pick a winner.
Mhm.
And often people will say, just pick a category, buy an ETF that
Yeah,
picks up
there's
everything,
there's
perhaps.
thematic funds, and we want to caution people about jumping in too much, because anything that has that kind of speculation could potentially lose everything.
Yeah.
So you want to be really careful about the dollar amount that you put into it, but there's ways in which you can spread across your investment so that you're gathering a lot of the different research and development and the innovative companies that are doing some
Yeah.
of this, right?
And some of it is if you have a gap in that space. There's a number of clients will call in and say, hey, I heard about this. What do we think about adding that to portfolio? And oftentimes we'll look and say, well, you actually already have them, or
Right.
you have a competitors of theirs, or you have that industry already. And so for a lot of people who are looking at their own portfolios to know if they have a well-diversified portfolio, they probably have exposure to a lot of these medical companies. And the question being, do they feel they need more exposure there? But I think that's one area, medical, that 10 years from now, we're going to see some great developments. And we're not going to talk about today, but I think there's also the secondary of medical delivery. That is going to change a lot in the not the global sense, but in the neighborhood by neighborhood,
Right.
how people can receive care at home.
Yeah,
telemed.
telehealth has become a really big factor, and I think it's becoming more and more prevalent, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, the cost of healthcare is continuing to rise, and they're trying to figure out how do we get better advice, better care, better treatment. And instead of having that one-on-one doctor and patient relationship, is there a better way to deliver that? So
Yeah,
it'll
that's
be
good.
more cost effective. Another big trend is, I think we're going to see a movement away from China. China has become a environment where businesses are becoming less and less enamored with that autocratic government. And one of the things that happened here in the last week is that Modi, he's the premier of India, and spoke before the joint session of Congress. Second time he's been able to do that, but there's a lot of buzz about India versus China.
Yep.
And India wants to be the new China, so to speak. And so is that a mega trend that is going to have a tremendous amount of influence over the next 10 to 20 years, like China was back in the late 70s and early 80s,
Yeah.
right?
Well, there's a few pieces of India that are very exciting. So one of them, which I didn't realize, but as of probably after today already, but India has been gaining in population compared to China. Mm-hmm. And I think I haven't checked it recently, but they've probably passed them.
They have
to be the now the largest population country in the world. The other aspect that's really unique is that 40% of China's or of India's large population is under the age of 25.
So they have a very young population,
yeah.
Where China is going the exact opposite. Their population is aging dramatically because of that one baby policy they had starting decades ago. Is coming back to really haunt them.
Yep.
Japan is going through the same issue, not for that reason, but because they just didn't have children post World War II, and it's really causing a dynamic shift in the aging of their population.
Yeah.
India doesn't have that issue.
Yeah, they have a young population. They have a lot of folks there. The other one that's a benefit is the infrastructure. That they've worked a lot on their infrastructure, and they have moving goods around, moving things is much better than it's been in decades prior. And so they have a lot. There's still some challenges though. For India, there's political challenges. Their system of how it will be over the next 10 years.
They have a lot of cultural issues. I mean, you have a caste system, and that's not going to go away. They are a democracy, but that also is mixed in with their culture.
Yep.
So things are slow there. It takes a lot to get structural change. So the leader like Modi has been able to institute some things like banking and fintech that's been amazing.
Yeah.
They've done some things there that I think with lightning speed comparative to other changes they've tried to make, and they haven't been able to do it.
Yep. And even with some of those, leapfrog technologies of, jumping straight to cell phones and things like that, there's the continuing concerns of kind of climate and food.
Right.
With that large of a population, you have to, feed that population. And as climate's changing, what impact will that have?
Yeah. I mean, India right now, during this Russia invasion of Ukraine, Russia was looking for buyers of their oil. And India stepped up and said, yeah, we'll buy your oil. And they took it at a deep discount. India is not energy independent. They're doing a lot in solar and other nuclear and things like that, but they still need fossil fuels, and they don't have a large supply. They don't have really a ready supply of fossil fuels oil and natural gas and things like that. So they are become more vulnerable. So there are some weaknesses within their structure. So
and so part of that thought is, say, investing in funds or holdings that relate to India over the next decade may be a really good choice as a macro trend. An interesting one for us, especially here in Southern California, is water. Water is becoming more scarce. The Colorado River, feeds a lot of the Western United States, and last few studies I've read, it's getting drier and more shallow. And so the question being, where in the country and the world ultimately, but immediately just in the country, is water being reallocated, and what development will be mitigated or expanded? Mexico, New Mexico, and Arizona. There's a number of building projects. There's areas that are kind of booming, but there's been some slowdown because of the water.
I mean, there's a future project of housing around Phoenix, and they're talking about 100,000 homes. And the question is, where are they gonna get the water to supply that number of homes? So again, I think water, the word that keeps coming back again and again and again, it's infrastructure. And infrastructure is going to be something that we're going to see this a lot in the next 10 years. So where we did the freeways in the 50s, Eisenhower had the freeway system put up. I think we're going to see a lot of infrastructure when it comes to water.
And some of that may be government work, some of that may be private enterprises. So, investing in companies that are engaged in solving some of these water issues. Maybe have a lot of work over the next 10 years. The one that you kind of mentioned here, and it's relevant, is energy. You mentioned it for India, but it's also for the United States. The number of studies talk about California, but also the United States moving to clean energy. And you and I talked probably a year ago of, it's not just we're going to shift away from this and into this, but looking at the reports, it's both and. We need to continue all the energy we have.
And or it's a combination.
And add on all the renewables that we can, and as well as build in the infrastructures. We had talked about people having electric cars, electric stoves, electric heaters, all the different electric items, and then even just locally, in Riverside, our power grid, we have a great electrical utility. They're a great system, but even with that, they struggle to keep up as people are needing more and more and more power as more things are running off electricity. And so the thought being, if we had just an instant conversion to electric cars, our infrastructure couldn't keep up. And so over the next, say, 10 years, as much as it's generating new sources of energy, solar harvesting, wind harvesting, perhaps even nuclear, if that were to come about. I know
nuclear is being talked more and more about that. And of course, there's been advances and changes on nuclear. Again, the biggest breakthrough, which they have not received, is fusion versus fissure. And I think, I think that that breakthrough, if they were able to really cross that line and be able to have a fusion nuclear reactor, that would change the outcome. That would be a game changer for the world.
But I think so, a lot of those space movies, of the world perpetuating these all sorts of different environments. If we have that type of breakthrough, scientific breakthroughs, it could be very meaningful. But even short of that, we're going to have energy is going to be a tight commodity and a changing commodity, and the infrastructure that goes with it is going to be meaningful over the next decade. So, companies that are engaged in energy itself as well as the infrastructure, I anticipate we'll have a lot of work. And one wild card, we'll just kind of throw out as we kind of end this section, but AI, as artificial intelligence is coming in, we're not seeing at the moment that that's its own industry in and of itself. However, it's augmenting and touching nearly every industry. I just read an article recently that was saying that Google's stock was moved down a bit, and one of the drivers they were feeling was less reliance on Google for searching and using artificial intelligence to do your search. I mean, searching isn't the same way, right? It's creating, it's generating the content. However, it was shifting away, and whether Google's doomed, I don't think they are. But every industry, I think artificial intelligence
industry is going to try and do catch up, right? I mean, all of a sudden they're going to be caught kind of leaning back on their heels and thinking, wait a minute, we got to catch up on this. So it's going to be. Again, I keep going back to that infrastructure. Everybody has to kind of retool. And in certain areas, there's going to be more retooling than not, right?
Yep. So those are some larger trends we see. Some of the smaller ones, part of it is nearshoring. We've talked about this a little bit of as with the pandemic, these long stretching supply lines became stressed.
Right.
And so there's a number of companies that don't want to have a factory half around the world. They want to have it close to their backyard. And so with that, there's more rail transportation and things that are in these nearshore factories that we use those same systems for supply lines, but they may be shifting a little bit. So there's a dynamic there. Local transportation will be one. Commercial real estate has not done. There's people that might think it's doomed with office space. It's not needed, but there'll be some dynamics there. And these ones, I'm not sure which way it's going to go. But there are trends we're seeing is commercial real estate has had a shift, and it will probably continue to have a shift over the next decade. But how exactly? I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's some trends we're going to watch. Anyway, we're going to continue our conversation, and we're going to talk about future trends. And we'd like you to just come back to us, and we'll finish this up. We'll be right back. Thank you. Welcome back. This is we're kind of talking about future. We're pulling out our crystal ball, and we're trying to figure out where the major trends are. And one of the comments, I made it earlier in the first segment, but the word that keeps coming up in everything we're reading and all of the dynamics, it's called infrastructure. And apparently not only here in the United States, but all over the world. And there's going to be a lot of money that's going to be put into infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And you can look at just about every particular sector, and it has to be updated. Yeah. And there's going to be people that are going to make a lot of money doing that. Yeah. Right.
And I think the first one that jumps to mind is the energy grid. Right. And we talked about in the first segment a little bit. And it'd be interesting of looking at how much of that is a public works project, how much of that is simply contractors that work with public works. But across the country, as we're moving towards more and more electric items, I think of it. I have an Apple Watch, I have a phone. I plug all these things in overnight. Number of people now have electric vehicles that is catching on, and so the amount of energy, electric energy that we're consuming is just on an upward trend.
So the battery issue, and that's where I look at for automobiles, is that there has to be storage of energy that can be re-released at appropriate times. That's going to take pressure off the grid. But I think there's going to be inflection points where it's going to be difficult, right? It's going to be really hard on the entire grid.
And batteries are expensive, and we've talked a number about the different raw ingredients that go into batteries.
Yeah, lithium
and going to make some giant batteries for every neighborhood. Say, there's a big hub that has that. I don't know that it's feasible. I don't know that that's a functional item. So there'll be some creative solutions, but there'll also be that the other infrastructure I think is medical. We saw with COVID a lot of medical infrastructure issues. People getting care and transition to care. And as we have more and more people receiving care in different ways, that infrastructure is so different. I mean, I think of one that, kind of ties the two, but, information infrastructure, I used to have a dial-up line. I used to have no internet, of course, and they had a dial-up modem. Right. And then over the years, we had a cable modem. It's moved and moved and moved. And now even when we think of medical being able to communicate through telehealth items, houses having broadband internet or having really high speed lines is becoming almost a necessity. Yeah. And that's an infrastructure that some places have naturally, others don't. We had a house we still live in that whenever it rained, our internet would go out. It wasn't us, it was the whole neighborhood. But there's some issue somewhere that when it got wet, it just stopped working. And it's just a dynamic that we walked into. So I think that's the infrastructure is a big one, and the infrastructure is not just our country, right? It's other countries. You can think of Brazil or some of these developing economies that are large economies. There's a big infrastructure push in Brazil for finance. You talked a little bit the microfinance in India. Same thing is going on with Brazil of giving more and more people access to banking, access to micro lending, access to those things. And in the U.S., it's not as big of a issue. We still have some unbanked populations, but there's a number of developing countries that's a massive leap that they've had. And it's
their exchange of dollars is almost archaic in India. And up until there were some major changes within that, it changed the transaction, the transfer of money between the user, the seller and the buyer. It was cash. I mean, it was very, and there was always like a money changer there. They were taking a percentage of it. So it was very expensive. And of course, it affects the poor more than it affects the wealthy. And so the changes in the fintech and how things were transacted changed dramatically. I mean, just even the delivery of public service money.
Yeah.
What we refer to as Social Security and Medicare or something like that. Well, within India, they have systems like that. They have services like that, but it was kind of controlled by these money changers. And what Modi tried to do is to get that out of the loop, try to get that out of the system, and so that the people that needed that service or needed that money, the transaction cost became virtually zero. Kind of like buying or selling stocks right now. It became a dramatic change and a shift in how that was working.
Yeah, and I guess wrapping this whole thing together, I see a brave new world. Of where we're going 10 years. I think you share that kind of the optimism. And I think there's a constant struggle we talked about initially is there's people who see doom in all of these. They see doom and concern and worry. And to take a balanced approach to both of these, but also to be part of that future, not just to watch it happen, but to be engaged in it. And, there's a lot of ways that people can get involved in either the local communities, but the larger world of having a hand in finding solutions and finding ways that we build our new infrastructures, that we build our new kind of economies and communities of the future. Water is a big one here in Southern California, where it's local to us, but there's been development, even building any sort of building. They have all sorts of water reclamation rules in California now. It's going to be an interesting dynamic.
And again, we have examples in other parts of the world on how best to use water and to get the best I look back at oil, for example. If you look at oil in the beginning of the 80s, the amount of energy that actually was used off of oil was dramatically more. So now you look at a barrel of oil and what you can actually get done with it as compared to what it was back in the early 80s.
Miles per gallon for cars and things like that.
And I think the same thing is going to happen with water. You're going to get a much higher use of the same water. So the filtration systems, the recycling of that water, the regeneration within the groundwater, things like that, is going to be different. They're not just going to let it run off. They're going to treat it and bring it back into the system so that we're going to get better use of the water that we need. And again, we're sitting next to the biggest body of water in the world. And there are places that are doing that desalination. It's going to get better and better. So I feel positive, not a negative to that.
Yeah, where we're headed. It's great. Well, if you missed any part of this episode, you can go on our website, retirementunlimited.com, and you can find the rest of the episode. You can also find us on YouTube.
Till next week, folks, may you grow in wisdom and knowledge. Thank you for listening.